This is DUI Traffic Stop Michigan, your rights and what you should do. In this video, I provide to the viewer basic information about DUI in Michigan and how a driver that is assertive with the police officer can really limit the amount of evidence that may be used against them in court. Each state has their own drunk driving laws. So what may work in Michigan could get you in a lot of trouble in a different state. Passive versus assertive interaction with the police. What does this mean? Essentially, to be assertive when you're speaking to the police, you need to know your rights. Once you know your rights, you will be able to contest certain things that a police officer will ask you to do during a DUI traffic stop. Assertive interaction with the police is a strategy designed to minimize the amount of evidence they can use against you. There are three categories of traffic stops. The bad driving category is the sort of driving that drunk driving is designed to prevent. I practice law in Traverse City, Michigan. The downtown district in Traverse City has many one-way roadways, and you would be surprised how many people, locals, end up driving the wrong way down a one-way street. Routine traffic stops are just that, routine. These are the things that police officers enforce 24 hours a day. When a prosecutor looks at a case, they're looking for the sort of driving that the statute was intended to prevent. And in the case of drunk driving, they're looking for that dangerous driving that will hurt people. And that's exactly what jurors want to see as well. There are three categories of self-assessment. This is something that every driver has to do on their own. At the bottom of the slide is the amount of alcohol that can be metabolized by the average liver. A drinker's body weight is the most important factor for determining BAC for a driver. There's a great YouTube video where there's a 110-pound woman drinking with a 300-pound football player, and you can see how quickly the woman becomes intoxicated to the legal limit compared to the 300-pounder. In this slide, I list the steps for a typical drunk driving. For some of the steps, I also list the repercussions for refusing to cooperate with the police instructions. There are two breathalyzers for each DUI traffic stop. The first breathalyzer is what we call a portable breath test, and that's a handheld unit that the police officer uses to verify their suspicion of drinking by the driver. The second test is more elaborate, and that test is called the Data Master test, and that's usually conducted at the jail. The PBT test is, generally speaking, not all that reliable. I've seen variances from results anywhere from 0.02 to 0.04. For example, suppose that a driver has a PBT test of 0.11. The officer drives them quickly to the station, and then their Data Master test is a result of 0.08. To me, that would indicate that the PBT device was not calibrated and it wasn't all that accurate. The PBT test is so unreliable that the prosecution may not introduce the test results at trial. If a driver refuses the PBT test during a DUI traffic stop in Michigan, that will result in a civil infraction with no jail time and no driving sanctions. However, if an officer makes an arrest and takes a DUI suspect to the jail and asks for a Data Master test, if a driver refuses the Data Master test, that will result in an implied consent suspension for 1 year. Before there's a Data Master test, a police officer is mandated by statute to read what we call chemical rights. Within those chemical rights, there's no mention as to the length of the suspension related to refusing to take the Data Master test at the station. It is important for every Michigan driver to know that if this is their first offense, drunk driving, or an impaired first offense, that the length of suspension, driving sanctions associated with a conviction for a regular drunk driving or an impaired driving is less than what they will receive if they refuse the data master test. Every year I talk to people who get caught in this trap, and it's not fun. So, what are the sanctions associated with a drunk driving suspect that is asked to step out of the car and perform field sobriety tests? The answer is there are no sanctions. There is no civil infraction. There is no driving sanctions for the driver when asked to perform these tests says, I will not do your test. The real risk associated with refusing field sobriety tests is that the police officer will arrest the driver and take him to the station. Likewise, the real risk associated with refusing a PBT at the road is that the officer will make an arrest and the driver will spend the night in jail. When I talk about assertive interaction with police, I'm talking about exercising and employing a strategy that will minimize the evidence that can be used against the driver in court. This strategy will likely result in the driver being arrested. However, it may also result in the driver not being charged with a drunk driving. I had a client that was convinced that he was drunk while he was driving. Officer asked him to step out of the car and perform field sobriety tests. Sure enough, the officer noted that he failed all three of the tests that my client took. When he was taken to the station, however, he only had a .05 on the data master test. How does a driver fail 3 field sobriety tests when they're well under the legal limit to drive? The first step in being assertive with the police is to refuse field sobriety tests. When they ask you to perform these tests to see if you're okay to drive, you simply say, I'm not going to take your test. So in this slide, I break it down from the driver's perspective, and the factor in this slide relates to their confidence that they're not drunk. High confidence would mean that the driver knows exactly how many drinks they had, when they started drinking. This driver also knows that they allowed a period for themselves to sober up, so to speak, and they know how alcohol affects them personally based on their body weight. The driver that is confident that they are not driving over the legal limit should refuse field sobriety tests but take the PBT test. Mr. Police Officer, I know what I've had to drink. I know I'm not intoxicated. I'd be happy to take your PBT test, but I'm not going to take your field sobriety test. If the officer becomes upset and arrests the driver should not panic. They should simply take the data master test as requested at the jail. In this slide, I'm talking about the driver who's not so sure whether or not they are legal to drive or not. This is the driver that knows that they've been pushing it more or less, that they've had a number of drinks and that they haven't had a lot of time to sober up. It is very important for the driver in this situation to be confident and to limit the amount of evidence that can be used against them in court. My advice for the driver that thinks that they are right at the legal limit or just over is to refuse the sobriety test and refuse the PBT test. Now, this is going to make the officer very angry, and the driver in this situation that refuses both the PBT and field sobriety tests must appreciate that the only test left for the officer to determine if they're drunk driving or not is the data master test, and this driver is likely to be arrested at this point. I know this is a hard pill to swallow. Nobody wants to be put in a cop car. Nobody wants to spend a night in jail. However, these sort of cases, the cases where the BAC of the driver are right around the legal limit, this is where the lack of other evidence indicating intoxication really becomes a factor. A Michigan prosecutor reviewing a police report for a drunk driver will look for every little piece of evidence that they can argue in court that would suggest this driver is driving drunk. At the beginning of this video, I talked about whether the driver has thick skin or thin skin. Make no mistake, this strategy will likely get the driver arrested. However, it may also save them the time, expense, and penalty of a drunk driving conviction. For the driver that knows that they're over the legal limit, I don't have a lot of advice for this sort of driver. This driver typically has a long history of substance abuse and alcohol issues. 9 out of 10 times, this driver has driven home well over the legal limit many times. The truth is, alcohol consumption is present in almost everything this sort of driver does. You'll see it in their driving, you'll see it in their speech, their interaction with the police. In this slide, I compare passive interaction with police versus assertive interaction with police. As I've already discussed, people can fail field sobriety tests when they're below the BAC limits for drunk driving. Also, I've also talked about how the portable breath test is not reliable and it may not be admitted in court. The passive fact pattern in this slide, when reviewed by a prosecutor, would look like a driver that is coming down from a high BAC. To the prosecutor, the passive fact pattern looks like a driver that was over the legal limit of 0.08 for BAC at the time they were driving, at the time the driver was stopped. In the assertive fact pattern, you can see how refusing the PBT and refusing field sobriety would limit what evidence the prosecutor could rely on to show that this driver was indeed intoxicated when driving. Here are some bonus tips for the person that finds themselves at jail and arrested for suspected drunk driving. Thank you for watching my video. Please visit my website, and if you're in need of a criminal defense attorney for drunk driving, please don't hesitate to give me a call. Thanks again.